Conservatives on the U.S. Supreme Court, pro-accountability and against big government, have empowered the U.S. Border Patrol to act with near impunity, but are happy to remind you that you can use your Second Amendment to defend yourselves against the government that they are creating. The number of state lawmakers that Virginia Thomas has pressed into illegally overturning the election rises slightly from 3 to 30. And the Department of Justice has requested all deposition transcripts from the January 6th committee as members say that there is now more than enough evidence to indict Trump. And lastly, Texas continues its long-standing tradition of not being pushed around by this little thing called reality. This is Overtime. There's always something now isn't there. It is staggering where the Supreme Court is headed. We made some predictions here on Overtime. I regret to inform you the only one that isn't coming true is the amount of time I thought it would take for these things to happen. It's going a lot faster. You may recall I had said that Miranda would be up on the table in no less than 2 years. And I really meant sort of roughly on the order of 2 years. It looks like Miranda is up now. But we'll get to that in a minute. L3 Harris, excuse me. L3 Harris is a American defense firm in talks with NSO Group to potentially buy the Israeli company's spyware program Pegasus. We've talked about Pegasus a great deal on this show. It's one of the most dangerous software packages on the planet, possibly the most dangerous software package on the planet. We have ample evidence at this point it's gotten in the hands of a lot of very bad people, including the very terrorists that this software is supposed to stop. It's been used to identify and locate, we believe, Khashoggi. Oh, Jesus, I've just spaced his name. I think it was a Washington Post journalist or correspondent that was killed by members of the. Stand by one. It was it was assassinated by the Royal House of Saud. It's also been used to track journalists and diplomats across the world. It's extraordinarily powerful stuff, very dangerous. We've discussed this repeatedly several times, and at this point now, a American defense contractor is apparently going to purchase it, despite the fact that it's been blacklisted and no U.S. companies are supposed to buy the software. A heat dome has encompassed now much of the Midwest. The Midwest is expecting three-digit temperatures all the way up through Tuesday. Meanwhile, Colorado is experiencing one of the worst droughts in history. The Colorado River is drying up, and they're looking at the power plant there experiencing a drought unlike anything seen in 1,000 years. This is going to cause, obviously, a water crisis, which there already is one in the area. Pat Robertson, no doubt, believes that this heat dome and water crisis is as a result of gays. Last I checked, it was because Texas voted for Trump. Speaking of Texas, Texas. I have a few objections to Texas. I'm gonna state my usual caveat before we get into Texas. Texas has managed to since, well, probably for the last 40 years, and to be quite fair, they've managed a way to still find ways to make themselves lower, in my opinion. One of In Time's best contributors lives in Texas, and she is absolutely delightful, and I think has stronger objections to the state than I do. most notably because she lives there. But I nonetheless, and despite the fact that I think she shares my views, because of my respect for her and how much work she does, I always am obligated to say that while I'm about to express some opinions about that state and the questionable parentage of some of its citizens, it does not by all means apply to everybody I've ever met from Texas. But yeah. The RNC is meeting actually as we speak to discuss their agenda, the Texas RNC, to discuss their agenda for the next year. This is a purported leak of their priorities going into the next year, the legislative priorities. Now, we have not been able to confirm this. I've gone through and done my best to confirm this. Several sources seem to believe it's legit, but they were unable to confirm the original source, so there's no way to know. I do know that it's actually very similar to the approved agenda from, and I don't have the 2021, but I do have the 2020, which was roughly the same. Very few things have changed. So I'm going to go over mostly the 2020 because I want to get into what some of these things mean, because this list doesn't actually say what they mean, but I do have the 2020 agenda, which contains most of these items, and we know what that means. So without further ado, election integrity requires citizenship verification for each voter, felony penalties for election code violations that threaten election integrity. I'll be sure to let Donald Trump know. Religious freedom, I think, is probably still on there somewhere. Restore the rights of individuals and organizations and businesses to exercise sincerely held religious beliefs by prohibiting local ordinances that would violate those rights. Children and gender modification, abolish the following practices for minors: intervention to prevent natural progression of puberty, administration of opposite-sex hormones, preference and performance of any type of gender reassignment surgery, abolition of abortion, abolish abortion by ensuring the right to life and equal protection of the laws to all preborn children at the moment of fertilization. Now, the reason this is important, we've had this discussion many, many times. There is a genuine misunderstanding. Oh, dear Lord, we try to talk about and today is actually going to be mostly focused on the Supreme Court of the United States, which is about to go full on unhinged in a way that I think is unprecedented in this country. We're going to discuss that. Most of tonight is going to be about the Supreme Court. But one of the things I've said is the Supreme Court is going to abolish abortion. I am very strongly held of the belief that they're going to attempt to do that within the next 2 to 4 years. I also added to that list Miranda and Gideon, gay marriage, a few others. The leaked Alito decision, in my view, was written explicitly to permit these things going forward. Now, when somebody's not listening, which is 90% of people you engage with in social media, they say, well, this Alito decision wouldn't ban abortions. Yeah, I'm well aware. They can't ban abortions with this decision, but they can with future decisions if if it's decided that a fetus at the moment of conception is in fact an American citizen, or any number of other ways. And this Texas this Texas agenda is attempting to do that, at least in the state of Texas. And if they can do that in the state of Texas, I don't understand why, given the makeup of the Supreme Court, anyone thinks they're not going to succeed in doing that in the Supreme Court. This is really quite stunning. It doesn't surprise me that Texas would try that, but given the Alito decision, which is not yet legal, I think at this point going forward they're going to be able to do that. So we're going to constitutional carry, restore Texas firearm owners' rights to carry. Wait a minute. Restore legal Texas firearm owners' rights, right to carry them openly. Yeah. Okay. Texas, at least GOP, the them applies to the previous applicable noun, the most applicable noun. That would be the owners. So what they're proposing here is the constitutional right for Texas firearm owners to carry Texas firearm owners. Well done. Without a concealed permit, by the way. So Texas is looking for a constitutional amendment to be able to carry firearm owners. Concealed. Monument protection. All monuments or markers in our state shall be protected by law from being removed, defaced, or destroyed, or otherwise dishonored. That is not currently on the list. I'll discuss what's currently on the list, but what I'm attempting at this point to demonstrate is that the 2020 list was not all that different and was heavily influenced, obviously, by the hot-button issues at the time. School choice for all, empowering parents and guardians to choose from public, private, charter, or homeschool options, and ban taxpayer-funded lobbying. Abolish all forms of taxpayer-funded lobbying, which is, a nice sentiment, but I have no idea what that means. Lobbying, which allows you to essentially bribe political officials, which is about 90% of lobbying, and anything with a super PAC attached to it, should be abolished. So I don't see them going that far. So I have no idea, apparently, if you're going to bribe public officials, you shouldn't be using taxpayer money to do that. Yay. Way to go, Texas. Way to take a stand. So, protect our elections, number one. My suspicion is that's going to grow to include any number of things that are the last. Ban Democrat chairs. That's one, even for Texas, I have a hard time believing is legit. Now, this is a screenshot. Somebody clearly took this off, and this was purportedly the final draft. We don't know yet. The legislative priorities haven't been published yet. So again, this has some air of verisimilitude simply because of the nature of it. A few reputable organizations have gone with it's been reported, but whether or not it's real hasn't been confirmed. Stop sexualizing Texas kids that I'm aware of. Nobody sexualizes Texas adults, so I don't think that's going to be much of an issue. Secure the border and protect Texas. That includes adding a wall and a provision that I saw earlier about fully funding the wall, at least on the Texas border. I'd like to understand how they're going to do that, given 9, eliminate property tax. They already don't have an income tax. They're going to eliminate property tax. Okay. Texas, I'm aware that you rank 38 in education, which is, congratulations. It's a significant improvement from 47 last time I had this discussion with you, this kind of one-on-one. But I'd like to point out, and by the way, 47th in health care. 32 cents of every dollar of your budget comes from the federal government. That means it comes from states like me, Massachusetts, which, by the way, is number 1 in education and in the top 10 in healthcare, and apparently does just about everything better than you, with a few exceptions. Texas does, in fact, rank quite high. They are the 11th poorest state, have the 5th highest imprisonment rate, and tough on crime is delightful. I'm sure you guys are having a good time with it. But it's done nothing to impede their progress, as they are the 2nd highest murder rate in the country. Good job. I don't need to mess with Texas. They apparently have delighted to do it with them to themselves. At any rate, considering you guys already have a number of issues that you haven't solved regarding education, healthcare, and murder. And considering the fact that you guys really can't pay for the people you're incarcerating as it is, and now you want to incarcerate more, and considering the fact that my state is giving 30 of its cents on the dollar to states like yours that can't carry their own weight, let me give you a little piece of advice that is free. I know Bush was, quote, from Texas, and I know that he suggested that the best way to get schools to do better is to cut off the funding for all the bad schools. But he was full of shit. And the reality is that if you're going to try to improve school education, which I see no evidence, I mean, that's on the agenda, like right there. That's on your agenda, but I see absolutely no evidence you guys are committed to doing this in any meaningful way. But let's, just to humor you guys, let's say you are eliminating property tax and saying that, and this elimination, as I understand it, would be statewide, so even districts couldn't do property taxes, wouldn't be able to do income taxes. Are you guys still against welfare out of curiosity? Because where are you going to get your money except from my state? Asking for a friend. All right. So that is the Texas RNC plans for Stop Executive Overreach. Oh, yeah, one of the other ones that they have. So for we do know that for 10 primary ballot proposals that they have proposed, eliminate all property taxes without implementing a state income tax, barring Texans from losing their jobs for declining a COVID vaccine. Let's see. Texas schools should teach students basic knowledge and American exceptionalism and reject critical race theory and other curricula that promote Marxist doctrine and encourage divisions based on creed, race, or economic status. I completely agree. I just was unaware that critical race theory did any of those things. Do you guys even know what it is? Never mind. I've seen your education numbers. You have no idea what critical race theory is. They should enact a state constitutional amendment to defend the sanctity of innocent human life created in the image of God from fertilization until natural death. And yes, that was, okay, so number 6, the Republican-controlled Texas legislature should end the practice of awarding committee chairmanships to Democrats. Texas should protect the integrity of our elections by verifying that registered voters are American citizens, restoring felony penalties, and enacting civil penalties for voter fraud and fighting any federal takeover of state elections. I am totally for that plan, and please then get behind the January 6th Commission, because that's exactly what they're trying to do, and you motherfuckers seem to be all for it. You may want to amend that to say, fighting any federal takeover of state elections from Democrats, because that's your actually only real objection. You know that, I know that. Let's stop playing games. And affirm that our freedoms come from God and that the government should have no control over the conscience of individuals. I have no idea what that means. None. I know they think they know what it means. I don't think they know either, and I think that's the point, because they're going to use that to just say, well, we can, anything that we object to, we don't have to do. Well, you know, I'm not even going to go there. That's a whole in-time show in and of itself. That is the proposals that they are looking at for the ballot. Go Texas. Meanwhile, the city of Uvalde and its police department are blocking the release of footage regarding the Uvalde Elementary School shooting. The evidence is part of an ongoing investigation into why officers took over an hour to respond as an active shooter was murdering teachers and children in school. They've hired a private law firm working outside the police department's own internal legal counsel to try to block the release of any material and footage taken on that day on the grounds that it, quote, could be highly embarrassing. I'm so sorry. I love Texas police officers. They're just so macho. Could be embarrassing. Let's see. It could involve emotional and mental distress. Yeah, it could. My advice is don't allow the shootings, or maybe shoot back. You know, if you stop the shooters, that has a tendency to reduce the overall emotional stress of a situation. Again, I'm just free advice from your brother up north. Let's see, and or is not of legitimate concern to the public. I'm thrilled that the Uvalde Police Department gets to determine when investigating gross negligence or malfeasance on the part of the department, that they're the ones that get to determine what evidence concerns the public or not. That's Texas, you guys are batting 1,000 this week. Meanwhile, 3 people were killed when a church potluck in Alabama turned violent as one of the parishioners pulled out a handgun and opened fire. One of the attendees, unarmed, subdued the gunman and held him. until the police arrive, suggesting that if you're going to get shot at, better to have one determined Episcopalian with a pot roast than 16 armed and trained Uvalde police officers, all ostensibly good guys with a gun. The shooter was a licensed gun dealer who occasionally attended the church and appears to operate his business out of his own home. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court of the United States is expected at this point to severely restrict the EPA's ability to rein in greenhouse gases as well as other federal agencies' powers. You may recall they've already done this with the SEC. They had an SEC ruling that dramatically limits the SEC's ability to charge anybody for violating SEC regulations. This is because Wall Street apparently is perfect as it is. It looks like they're going to be doing the same thing to the EPA. It's expected that they will rule that it is unlawful for any federal agency to make, quote, major decisions without clear authorization ahead of time from Congress. Loris Gostin, a public health official at Georgetown University, has said, quote, a narrow reading of what the federal agencies can do is going to literally handcuff the federal government from taking action to protect Americans' health, safety, and the environment, which I think is actually kind of the point. And I don't mean this cynically in that they want the death of America, but they want government small enough to be drowned in a bathtub. They've said that time and time again. The problem is there are times when we're 50 states and there's times when we are one country. And when it comes to the environment, we are one country. And what the citizens in darling old Texas do actually have an impact on me and my beloved educated state of Massachusetts. Oh, and much better poverty numbers than Texas, too. Did I mention that earlier? I may mention a gripe or two on Texas if I didn't say that earlier. It's okay. I know. Don't mess with Texas. However, the Americans for Prosperity Foundation wrote in amicus that, quote, Congress did not and under our Constitution cannot grant elected administrative officials at the EPA legislative power to creatively reimagine energy policy for the entire country. Now, Gostin replied to that specific complaint saying, quote, when Congress gives powers to the Food and Drug Administration or the EPA or the CDC, it did so with many, many decades ago, and it could not possibly foresee all of the hazards that the American public would face. Georgetown University law professor and Obama EPA official Lisa Heinzerling, I think that's correct, said today that at a time when Congress is in full gridlock, it would be difficult, if not impossible, to pass new laws to address the emerging threats. What this is to say is that Congress, already slow as fuck and getting slower, is not going to be able to address any of these things. That's why we have agencies like the EPA. Now, those agencies need Dear Lord, I'm not even going to get into it. Meanwhile, in a 6-3 decision, the U.S. Supreme Court has additionally rejected Bob Boole's lawsuit against the U.S. Border Patrol, saying that Border Patrol agents should have strong protections against damages for violating constitutional rights. Let me say that again. Border Patrol agents should have strong protection against damages for violating constitutional rights. Bob Boole is the owner of a bed and breakfast in Washington State. In 2014, the Border Patrol questioned him, and Agent Eric Egbert was interrogating him. He suspected that Boole was trying to smuggle a Turkish immigrant through the U.S.-Canadian border. During that questioning, Egbert lifted Boole off the ground and slammed him into an SUV. Boole filed a complaint, and the agent apparently and subsequently retaliated by reporting Boole to the IRS and other government agencies. U.S. Customs and Border Control's Internal Affairs Department investigated Egbert. Egbert refused to comply with the investigation and was fired for failing to cooperate. He was, however, later reinstated to U.S. Customs and Border Patrol. The bed and breakfast, Boole's bed and breakfast, aptly named, I'm not kidding, the Smuggler's Inn, became a regular stop for Border Patrol agents as it was suspected as being used for drug distribution and human trafficking across the border. Boole, meanwhile, in fact, did plead guilty in August of 2021 to helping people cross into Canada illegally and was sentenced to 30 days in jail, which at that point was time served. However, it was also discovered that he has been working as a paid informant for the federal government, apparently tipping them off to persons of interest in relation to drug and human trafficking matters as they come through his bed and breakfast, again called the Smuggler's Inn. I'd be fired if I tried to make this stuff up. I mean, Boole sued for damages as a result of the fake complaints filed by Egbert and for excessive force. A 1953 regulation gives the Border Patrol broad authority to act within 100 miles of every coastline or foreign border. This has been a huge concern for the state of Maine because it turns out that if you give any agency authority to act within 100 miles of any U.S. coastline or foreign border, that covers the entirety, every square inch of the state of Maine. Maine has had some complaints about the use of Border Patrol recently, and this would apparently give them the ability to act with large impunity across the state. Now, there is nuance to this. They can't do anything they want, but you cannot sue them if they violate your rights. So what recourse is there? Well, let me get into that in a second. This ruling did not actually contest the findings of a previous court that the agent had in fact violated Boole's rights and that the agent had not acted properly, but they decided that whereas specifically with the Border Patrol, they patrol based on a national security issue, that the courts cannot act as a tool for adjudicating damages without legislation from Congress. In essence, they argued what you have been seeing now, starting with the Alito decision, this idea that literally, if it's not in the Constitution, it doesn't count. And the most narrow view of our rights as Americans that you have ever you've ever considered in your life, probably at least as narrow as in the original drafting of the Constitution, which, by the way, I understand is their argument. That's how they should be. But we've changed a touch in the last 100 or so years. At any rate, the argument here is that while you do have rights, believe it or not, I may come as a shock to a number of Americans listening to this, while you do have rights, the Constitution does not indicate how to remedy a situation where those rights are violated by, say, the Border Patrol. Ergo, until Congress legislates a remedy, you cannot sue them. Until Congress says it's okay to have the judicial branch of this country decide whether or not they broke the law and violated your rights to do its job in regards to not only actually, because this can be applied broadly, but specifically in this case to Border Patrol, but more accurately to any federal law enforcement officer. Until Congress says it's okay to sue them, you cannot sue them, no matter what they do. While this talks about picking up a man and throwing him into an SUV, the law is equally applicable if he just goes up, puts a gun to his head and says, "You want to confess?" I says, "No, I didn't do it," and then blows his brains out. It's equally applicable. I think that's a problem. Moving on. While we have been talking about Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health, which has been, as I have said before, I think it's got very little to do with abortion. I know it looks like it has to do with abortion. I know the leaked decision has upset a lot of people based on abortion. I have said repeatedly, and I stand by this, that you are missing the forest for the trees. I wish it was about abortion. I wish that's all this was. I view that decision as, and I've read it very carefully, and I'm aware that they try to add in a paragraph or two to tamp down fears. But it is crystal clear to me that in both on paper and in practice, That Alito decision is designed to overturn the last 50 years of progressive legislation. This includes, but is not limited to, Gideon, which is the decision that said that you have a right to an attorney, and a competent one. Why? Because the federal government and the states' governments have an overwhelming advantage over you as it is. The only way to ensure that your constitutional and presumably God-given rights are enforced is to either pray for them, apparently. That's the solution that they're going for. Have God enforce them for you. Or to have an attorney who is competent defend you. That is your only line of defense, and the only line of defense of any innocent person is that all people have a right to an attorney. At this point, I believe that is on the chopping block. I believe they're going to go after Miranda first, and at this point, we believe that's the case. I think they are now poised to overturn Miranda. I had said that I thought Miranda would be overturned in the next 2 years. I honestly didn't think it would be 2 months from that prediction. I don't even think it's been 2 months from that prediction, but So Vega versus Teko is now before the Supreme Court, and it is arguing whether a person's federal constitutional rights are violated if police officers fail to inform them of their right to remain silent, their right to be represented by an attorney, and the right not to self-incriminate. These warnings came into existence in a 1966 case and are called the Miranda Warnings, named after that case, where it was decided that, in fact, you do have to be aware that you have these rights as an American citizen. They didn't say explicitly you had to receive that warning per se, but that if you did not know that you had your rights, you can't, it's the same as not having rights. So you must know what your rights are before police officers are allowed to interrogate you. That is the famous Miranda warning. At this point, it looks, the expectation now is that the Supreme Court is going to reverse Miranda and, much like in the Dobbs, give it back to the states. So they're not going to say that, that officers can't Mirandize somebody, but they're going to say it's up to the individual states and that you have no constitutional right to Miranda warnings. You have no constitutional right to know what your rights are. If you don't know, that's on you. I actually personally don't mind because I come from a state that's got the best education in the country, and every Massachusetts citizen knows what their rights are. Texas, I'd be a little more concerned. But it wouldn't catch me dead in Texas. So you guys do what you want. Truth be told, I say that as a joke, but the reality is this is going to affect negatively states like Texas far more than states like Massachusetts because we are fucking educated. At any rate, this is a there's nothing else I can say on this. This is based on the exact same premise that the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which has not yet been done, but at this point I don't see how it can be avoided. It's the same decision for the same reasons, and it is, I guarantee you, it is going to cite the Alito decision in doing it. That decision had nothing to do with abortion. It had to do with overturning all of it, abortion just being one of them. Moving forward, let's stick with the Supreme Court since they're batting aces as well. Last month we had learned that Virginia Ginni Thomas, conservative activist and wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, pressed 3 Arizona legislators to overturn the legal and certified. In Arizona, they were certified. Results of the Arizona election. Quote, Article 2 of the United States Constitution gives you the awesome responsibility to choose our state's electors, she said. However, Article 2 of the Constitution does not give them the responsibility or power to choose state electors. Rather, it says it's up to the states themselves how they choose, and each state is responsible for choosing how it's done, and states can certainly hand that to their legislators if they want to. They can toss a coin if they want to. The Constitution is pretty clear. Each state can do it any way the state chooses. Once again, we're back to this very similar and starting to become very dark argument from the Republicans at this point. So she's misrepresenting Article 2 in order to pressure legislators to break Arizona law. And I say that because Arizona actually has decided how the legislators are appointed. And it turns out that this is silly. This is silly. But they go based on the vote. So it turns out the people of Arizona get to pick, not the legislators. And this is actually a law. Some idiot just said, wouldn't it be a good idea if the people of Arizona got to choose the electors? And so that was codified in Arizona law. Whoever wins the vote in Arizona gets the electors. That is Arizona law as Article 2 of the Constitution dictates. Ginni has no clue what she's talking about. We know where she got it from, though. We'll get to that in a second. So she pressured 3 legislators to violate Arizona law by overturning the will of the voters and handing it to Trump after it had already been certified by Arizona's state attorney. Sorry, not state attorney, by Arizona's Secretary of State. It was already certified. We've also learned that she was, in fact, at the Stop the Steal rally in Washington preceding the insurrection riot, and have learned now that she had engaged in at least 29 text messages with White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows at the time, strategizing on how to overturn the results of the 2020 elections. This is the wife of a Supreme Court justice. Rusty Bowers, Speaker of the House of Representatives in Arizona, said, quote, "As a conservative Republican, I do not like the results of the presidential election. I voted for President Trump and worked hard to re-elect him. But I cannot and will not entertain a suggestion that we violate the current law to change the outcome of a certified election." John Eastman is now understood to be the cornerstone of Trump's attempt to overturn the results of the U.S. election. And he posited getting states' representatives to choose and certify their own electors regardless of the votes within the states. This was actually one of his 7 points, which we covered at this point over a year. Actually, we covered it during the election, because that's when it first leaked. That's how long this has been going on. And that's how many people know what the hell's going on, too. I mean, we're in time. We're a YouTube channel, and we covered this plan before the election. Anyways, it was a 7-point plan by John Eastman, and the want to know what some of the plans were. His 7-point plan included strategies such as having the state electors, the legit state electors, not the state electors, the state legislator, certify their own electors regardless of who won in the state. That was one of his points. If that didn't work, he suggested sending fake electors for certification. If that didn't work, he said that VP Mike Pence should ignore the Biden electors, and if he refused to do that, then simply refuse to certify entirely and kick it back to the states for 10 days. All of these strategies were part of his 7 points memo, and at this point, all of them were attempted simultaneously. These arguments have been applied in at least 7 states, and the states have unanimously rejected them, as have all states' attorneys and the attorneys general and governors of these states, most of them, by the way, Republicans. Even John Eastman has argued that while he believes these tactics are legal and appropriate, they should never be tried or exercised in any other election ever going forward. They should be done just once and never do it again, because they would completely invalidate the election process. That is according to John Eastman, the man who invented this strategy. Of the 62 lawsuits brought forward in regards to most of these issues, half were dismissed out of hand as inappropriate and or without standing, and all but one of the remainders were failed utterly in court. The one successful one failed to produce an outcome, failed to produce results that would change the outcome in any way. To date, outside the claims of Rudy Giuliani and Donald Trump, there is no evidence of fraud so even remotely close to sufficient to have changed the outcome of the 2020 election. There is no evidence of voter machine tampering or widespread fault of any kind. Dominion has just won a challenge to their suit of Newsmax. They are suing Newsmax for over $1 billion for their false claims that the Dominion voting machines were not working properly. There is no evidence that they were not working properly. They have been tested and examined since, and in all of those states, the Dominion machines were certified to be working properly, and 7 different states, 7 different independent investigations, and all of them have found that Joe Biden won the election, and he won fair and square. Now that they are clear on Newsmax, they have already won previous challenges against Fox News and other individuals such as Rudy Giuliani and news organizations, and they're going to be continuing with their lawsuits against all of them. Meanwhile, while the spouses of Supreme Court justices typically resign political positions. This includes the husband of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the wife of Chief Justice John Roberts, all of whom resigned all of their political activities when their spouses became members of the Supreme Court. Clarence Thomas is a notable exception. He's ruled in 5 cases regarding January 9th, despite what is now an obvious and significant conflict of interest. We've now learned that Ginni did not approach 3 Arizona governors. She approached 29 of them, asking them to break the law and overturn the election in favor of Donald Trump. Ginni Thomas. She's been asked to testify before the House committee. We will have that up in a minute. But Clarence Thomas has ruled in 5 cases regarding January 9th, and there is now an obvious and significant conflict of interest. In one case, specifically the case where Eastman refused to turn over his documents, citing attorney-client privilege, that case, the Supreme Court decided that he had to turn them over because in this case, it was an investigation of a commission of a crime, and attorney-client privilege does not apply in cases of a commission of a crime. There was one dissent in that opinion. One Chief Justice decided that Eastman should not turn over those notes, the notes which we now know contained multiple conversations with Ginni Thomas. That justice, her husband, Clarence Thomas. That means we now have him voting to refuse to disclose documents which may implicate his own wife in a crime. She has been, believe it or not, asked to testify before the House committee. This is the letter here. Quote, on June 30th, 2021, the U.S. House of Representatives adopted a resolution, I'm going to paraphrase just a touch, to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol. They're investigating the facts and circumstances that led to the January 6th attack and issues relating thereto. The Select Committee has recently obtained additional information regarding the activities of John Eastman. Yeah, he was murdered on the last one. He was absolutely, he is gone. The committee believes that you likely have information relevant to our investigation, and we request an interview with you to discuss the knowledge of certain events and activities following the November 20th, 2020 presidential election. We respect your privacy, and our questions will be limited to issues relating to January 6th, the activities that contributed to or influence the events of January 6th and the transfer of power after the presidential election. We are specifically investigating the activities of President Trump, John Eastman, and others as they relate to the Constitution and certain other laws, including the Electoral Count Act. Yeah, if you saw our last, that's an important one. The Electoral Count Act, let's see, lost my place. That set out the required process for the election and inauguration of the president. The Select Committee has obtained evidence that John Eastman worked to develop an alternate slate of electors to stop the electoral count on January 6th. No shit. In early December, his efforts were in full swing. A federal court recently stated that, quote, his and President Trump's pressure campaign to stop the electoral count targeted every tier of the federal and state election officials. That quote comes from the federal judge that said that Trump and Eastman likely committed crimes in this case, and was the decision that her husband was the sole dissent on turning over those records. That's a hell of a quote to include. The select committee has, they're not playing. Oh, they are not playing. The select committee has obtained evidence that you had certain communications with John Eastman during this time period. We believe you may have information concerning John Eastman's plans and activities relevant to our investigation. We would like to meet with you soon, but we would also like to accommodate your schedule. We propose meeting with you on July 6th, 7th, or 8th. Please let us know which of these dates will fit your schedule. If you're unavailable for these dates, we can arrange a time during the week of July 11th. Now, I had misspoken earlier and said that this was a subpoena. It was not. It was simply, she was served with it. So she's been served with this is an official summons, but she has not yet been subpoenaed. A full accounting of what happened on January 6th is critical to the Select Committee's legislative recommendations, and the American people deserve to understand all of the relevant details. Thank you in advance for your consideration of this request. All right, I think what we're going to do, that wraps up the latest news since our last rundown. That's what I get for not doing these slightly more often. Jesus, although at this point we could do one every other day. And we still couldn't keep up. I haven't hit the live chat yet, so let's take this down. And let me say hi to everybody. I'm sure people have been talking. I wanted to get through this. Yeah, we because our schedule has changed dramatically because of the hearings. Normally the rundown is on Wednesdays, and right now Wednesdays have been in prep for Thursdays or Mondays or Tuesdays or when nobody knows when these things are happening. The next select committee hearing is on Tuesday. It may be moved. We are expecting it specifically to deal with the fake electors, which would be election fraud in 7 states, and very serious election fraud. Michigan is taking it quite seriously. The Michigan Attorney General is in a bit of a bind because one of the fake electors was her opponent when running for office. And as such, she is now going to be investigating a political opponent. She does not want to do that just because it looks bad. Wow, ethics. It's so weird, it sends a chill up your spine. I haven't heard it or seen it in quite some time. And not for nothing, but so far, and this may be a throwaway line, I've seen a lot more of it on the left than I have on the right. At any rate, she doesn't want to investigate, and it's the head of the GOP there, the head of the state's Republican committee was one of the fake electors. They all have to be investigated criminally. She did not want to do that, and she also pointed out that this crossed state lines, so this is really a federal issue. She has said if the federal government will not involve themselves in it, she will prosecute it, but she's waiting for the feds. Who knows what the DOJ is going to do. We've been getting some mixed signals, but it's now leaning strongly towards they're going to go after him. We're going to see a bit more after the hearing on Tuesday. Pennsylvania, I believe it wasn't Pennsylvania. Was it Arizona? One of the other states, the electors did not have fake certifications. And it said that they were to be used only in the case that the actual electors were contested for some reason. Now, it's still fraud. They're not allowed to do that. But since the actual electors were used, the state attorneys general is saying, well, it's not really illegal because we didn't use them. That's like when Donald Trump Jr. said, well, he literally said, I tried to get dirt on Hillary. I really wanted it from the Russians, but they didn't give me any. So obviously it wasn't treason because it didn't work. I should not know more about our legal system than the prosecutors or the state attorneys general who's sitting there saying, well, it didn't work, so it's not a crime. All right. Let's see. Yeah, I'm very proud of the professionalism and integrity of everybody that works on this show at every level. Especially recently, I've been a little more animated. And especially on overtime, I try to avoid that because this is really supposed to be a rundown of the news. But this is getting genuinely unhinged. And I really detest how often people sit there and say, well, the entire country's at risk. And liberals don't say that very often. That's a mantra you hear from conservatives a lot, right? You know, well, the whole country is going to be overturned if the whole country's going to go to hell if you roll back the Second Amendment or, you know, anything like that. And, you know, well, if we tear down statues, there's no America anymore. We hear this a lot. And we have heard it from the left, but we hear it a lot more from the right. That's just their bullshit. The left has plenty of bullshit too, so let's not. But their bullshit is, you know, oh, this is going to end the country. This is the first time I see people on the left saying, yeah, this may do it. And it's the shenanigans on the right, and this may do it. I'm a little pissed at conservatives for putting me in the position where I have to say, thank God for Mike Pence. I'd like somebody to really think about, and they mentioned this, the committee mentioned this, I'm glad they did, and they probably didn't really need to harp on this, but I would like people to just stop and think for a minute of what actually would have happened if Pence had gone along with this. You'd have had the first major, intractable constitutional crisis in the history of this government. You'd have had armed conflicts in the streets over this, and it would not be resolved by anything. One side would decide by the time this was done that they were ripped off. There's so much disinformation. It hadn't been stopped until that point. So much lying. Even if the rule of law were restored, you'd get at least a third of this country saying they had the election stolen from them either way and willing to fight for it. That's how close we came. And I haven't heard anyone come up with a single argument that isn't what nearly happened. Yeah, I'm a little animated. Yeah. All right. So let's see. I'm gonna go check out the live chat. Before the end of the month is to get Pat's. Yeah. Let's see. Property taxes, and yeah, I mean, they can do anything they want to with their tax. I think the reason Texas bothers me so much is because I've never seen that much difference between the sense of entitlement and what they've actually earned in anybody, in any country, in anything. And there are some countries that really think their shit don't stink. But here's Texas, who can't get anything right. They can't, even by their own metrics. But what they do is they just deny the reality of it, right? They honestly thought they could secede. They honestly thought that when Perry was doing all his bullshit. That's when I just lost any respect whatsoever for Texas at all. Because they actually believed they could secede. And I was like, why don't you do the math? If you secede, you will be dropped to third world country status in less than a year. Less than a year. You'll have no roads, no infrastructure. Your people will be starving. But hey, you know what happens to me if Texas bails? The state I'm in, the average education level just went up. The average income just went up. The average the amount of health care that you're receiving, like just as the average went up. The average quality of life goes up. Everything gets better for the United States if Texas leaves. But they're doing us a favor by sticking around? I don't think so. All right. And again, if somebody wants to debate that with me, I'm happy to do it. The numbers don't lie, but you know. let me see, no unnecessary surgery on it. Yeah, there. That's super chat, but you need to conserve funds. I appreciate it, Porpoise. You've done lots, so we'll take it as a super chat. Sinister Porpoise. Sinister Porpoise for 100 bottle caps. Seriously, what are Democratic chairs? What are... well, they're chairs, but they lean to the left. Okay, that was really bad. Let's see. It's a really protection of monuments. I know it's just, is Texas still number one in death penalty executions? Probably. Wouldn't surprise me, and they're genuinely proud of that too. I remember seeing Ron White. He's a comedian. You can't take him, for what he says. But I remember he was talking about how proud he is to be a Texan. And he said, other countries are talking about repealing the death penalty. In Texas, we're putting in an express lane. If more than 3 eyewitnesses saw you commit your crime, you don't get to, you don't get an appeal. You go straight to the top of the line. Jack, really proud of that. Ignoring the fact that we know of all the kinds of evidence brought into court, eyewitness testimony has 2 really unique facts. 1, it's the most common kind of testimony used in court. 2, it's the most unreliable testimony that's used in court today. It's the most unreliable. We've known that. If there are 10 witnesses to a bank robbery, you'll get 15 descriptions of who did it. All right. Improve school education by destroying school education. Well, again, in Texas that may work because if they don't educate their kids, it doesn't seem to me it could do much worse than what they're doing now. Did I mention that I'm going to bring up Texas a few times during this stream? If I didn't mention that, I'm just saying. Let's see. Are those not public records and thus must be made available? That's a good question, Titan. I would assume so. They obviously do have the right to withhold some of them for certain concerns, and that's what they're doing. To the best of my knowledge, so they have an internal counsel that is supposed to deal explicitly with these kinds of issues. They're not relying on that. They've hired, because apparently Texas has money to burn. The police department has hired an outside private firm to defend against releasing this material. I think the burden is on them to defend withholding it, but they have decided they're going to withhold all of it, not select pieces, all of it. Lord Clunk, build a safe room in each classroom, build some... listen. That's been proposed. And what was proposed was bulletproof bookshelves, so that when shooting breaks out inside a classroom, the bullets don't go out and hit, kids in the hallways and stuff like that, which is awfully considerate. But here's the problem. I brought up the church shooting for a very explicit reason, aside from the fact that I can't believe that a potluck guy with a pot roast, armed with a pot roast, stopped. He had more courage, less weapons than the Don't Mess with Texas police force, and did a lot better a job. This was a potluck, a church potluck. Are we going to, and by the way, I know Lord Crunk there was being facetious, wasn't genuinely proposing it. At least that's the way I read it. So this isn't an attack on Lord Crunk. But to sort of play off of what Lord Crunk had said, that's the proposal, right? Is that we fortify the schools, we turn them into military installations. And we can do that. I think that's a very poor idea for any number of reasons I'm not going to get into right now. But that isn't going to stop it. People who want to do things like this still have access to the guns. They'll go somewhere else. You've got to fortify the churches. You've got to fortify the post offices. You've got to fortify every single public building and location, all of it. But apparently, it's wish thinking. It's nothing but wish thinking over there. And that's just it. If we think hard enough, if we pray hard enough, God will save us, I guess. That's probably unfair. I don't know what the hell they're thinking, except that, and it's the same, it's literally the exact same kind of wish thinking and denial of reality that this whole, secession business was. And I would genuinely vote to let Texas lead the union. I would do that. I will donate I'm not going to go quite so far as to say that In Time will donate, because In Time is going to speak for a lot of people. If everybody on In Time was willing to donate, I would donate in the name of In Time. If not, I will personally donate to any candidate, any Democratic candidate who would support giving Texas the right to leave the Union. Yes, I am behind that. That's not a joke. And then when people see what happens to Texas, okay. All right. Yeah. Let's see. So I'm still going through the live chat. I've just about padding aces. Don't give them any ideas. Doorknob head. I needed that. Thank you. Yeah. Sorry. My bad. You're right. I should be a little more careful. Yeah. This is. I'll get into the Supreme Court right before, and then I think we're gonna wrap this up. How can you get pardoned before you get charged? Well, yeah, I mean, that was Nixon, right? I mean, Nixon wasn't charged with anything, and he got pardoned. You can be preemptively pardoned. That causes a lot of problems, not the least of which is now you've lost your biggest tool in investigating the crime. If somebody's pardoned, there's a very good question as to what happens then. The general consensus is, let's say somebody is pardoned and they're part of a larger conspiracy. If they're pardoned, now they have to testify. The reason why is because the Constitution says that you cannot be compelled to put yourself in jeopardy. You cannot be compelled to, well, it says you can't be, Jesus, I forget the exact wording, but the takeaway has been that you cannot be compelled to put yourself in jeopardy. This is why your speech can be compelled if, for example, a district attorney makes a deal with you and says, we will not prosecute you under any set of circumstances, then you can be compelled to testify because nothing you say is actually going to be able to be used against you. That's one of the things that happened with the Cosby case. As much as I detest Cosby and what happened, the reality is, once the only way Cosby got hooked was because he admitted everything he did. He admitted it all. Why did he admit it? He admitted it because they weren't going to hook him. They didn't have the evidence. So they made a deal with him that they would not prosecute him criminally if he would admit it in a civil case. So he went and admitted it in a civil case. That's it. They cannot prosecute him after that. They just can't. The only saving grace, and I know it sounds terrible, because he's guilty. He's absolutely guilty. He's admitted all of it. But the reality is you wouldn't have even had that admission if the DA hadn't have made that. He'd have gotten nothing. Nobody would have won if the DA hadn't have made that deal. So as much as that deal sucks, it was that or nothing. And as soon as you kneecap the DA's ability to make deals like that, you'll never get a deal like that again. And then the next time Bill Cosby comes around, or somebody like him, they get jack. They get nothing for it. DA made the deal. Right or wrong, the DA made the deal. Anyways, if you're pardoned, you cannot be convicted for that crime, so you have no constitutional right to not testify anymore. That's been the thinking. Now, watch, this Supreme Court, who the hell knows where that's going to end up. All right, so everyone's talking about somebody being pardoned. I'm trying to figure out who. A lot of people were pardoned, and it was. Yeah, I'd be happy to be a meat shield for a police officer for about $10 an hour. Should be grateful for that. Well, I'm hoping. I hope you're worth more than $10 an hour. I think you're worth more than $10 an hour to act as a meat shield. Come on. Yeah. Yeah, it's this whole thing is. All right, so take away Titan Uranus's wrench and give it to me. He's lost touch. Grr. Someday, if you want, you try this. Try taking away his wrench. It comes back. It's part of the YouTube terms of service. When you get a channel, it comes with Titan wrenched. I've tried it. Believe me, I've tried it. I've just sort of learned now to just sort of accept it, roll with it, and, pray and roll up into a ball, go, it'll be okay. It'll be okay. He's, everything's been okay so far, but it's, you try taking the wrench. All right. So, YouTube terms of tight. Yeah, exactly. He just he came with the channel. There was nothing we could do. It's like, you buy a property. There's a guy who's already living there. It's like, you can't evict him. Thank you all for joining us. So, we are going to be continuing our rundowns, but the schedule is going to be very iffy. There's a tremendous amount of news to cover. We have to get back into Ukraine. Ukraine is a tipping point. We're now doing 2 long lead stories that require a good deal of investigative work. When I say investigative, I mean, we're sending people out to beat the streets, but there's a lot of research, so let me say that. There's a lot to do. We're going to keep up with the overtimes, but when they air is going to be iffy. If you're on our Discord, you can be notified when they air, and hopefully you're more than welcome to contribute, and you can subscribe, share these, and I got to tell you, the subscriptions help, the thumbs up help. It's a great way to support us. If you want to become a patron, that's another great way to support us. And just if you can't or are not interested in doing any of those things, if there's something that we've done that you like in the past, recently, any of our past shows, want to share it with a friend, that's always another great way to help in time. Thank you all so much for joining us, and look forward to, we're going to be broadcasting. We've got a couple shows coming up. We've got a week from Tuesday, we're going to be discussing nanobot technology and a few other interesting things, but all of this is going to unfortunately be subject to the House committee. I think that is probably the single most important thing we could be covering right now, and we're going to be covering it. The next one is on Tuesday, and then I think they've got one scheduled on Thursday. Tuesdays, I think that's going to be big, folks. I really think that's going to be big. I hope you're going to join us for that. I think we've been doing a good job. Very proud of it. So come join us for that, and we will see you all when all of this stuff gets sorted. Thank you all for joining us, and have a pleasant evening.